So today I'm delighted to be joined by Jason Garner, and Jason has got a fascinating story to tell that we've come across on Everyday Mindfulness or at Everyday Mindfulness. So firstly, hello Jason, nice for you to speak to me. Thank you.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. The first time I kind of encountered you was in your article that you wrote on your blog about not having to be what for family hearing might be best called an a-hole, and so that absolutely fascinated me. And in that, you start off by talking a lot about your childhood and the kind of sort of various traumas there. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that for people who hadn't read it?
Yeah, I thought I wanted to start that article off with an honest sharing because, as you know, one of the points of the article is that our childhood and the things that occur in our lives are one of these things that we hide underneath this mask that causes us to act like an a-hole. And so I shared the story of my father leaving at a really young age, and I was old enough that I remember it, but I must have been 3 or 4 years old, and then kind of not seeing him anymore. And he had when he left, he had taken a bunch of boxes, and in the boxes were my stuffed animals. In particular, I had a Winnie the Pooh stuffed animal that was, a treasure to me as a little boy. And so, in addition to pestering my mom, we want to see our dad, my sister and I. We also wanted our stuffed animals, and so finally, it must have been maybe a year or more later, we were finally driven out to this house that he lived. And when I got there, it turned out that he had another family, and there were boys there who were playing football with him. And the question I posed, or the feeling that I expressed in the piece, was that at that point it was very clear to me how unlovable I was. And the evidence was there in front of me because my dad had chosen to love these other boys and not me. And I think that kind of, I think sometimes there's these themes that we can find in our lives if we go back far enough, these kind of line in the sand moments that we spend our whole lives trying to compensate for. And I think for me that was one of them. Is I decided I was never going to be unlovable again, and so I worked and worked and worked, and I became the boss, and I became powerful, and I got to a place that I couldn't be left behind because I was in charge, or so I thought, right? And I think, like, if we look inside and we find really tender, vulnerable pains that we have, we can learn so much about ourselves. And so I wanted to start that piece by sharing mine in a hope that it would provoke kind of that thinking and that feeling amongst the readers as they read the rest of the piece.
Yeah, I found it desperately difficult to read that bit. I must say it's very
Mm-hmm.
very moving, and you could just feel your pain, and yeah, very very upsetting actually to read that. So you felt that kind of drove you in your career, that kind of wanting to never feel like that again. Perhaps is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it drives me now. I'm not a subscriber to kind of like we're broken and we get over stuff in life and then we're all good. I I I believe more that we're filled with an innate goodness and innate wellness, but that we have kind of this ego story that's going around that's not something separate. It's actually like it's there and it's very sticky. And more what we're learning to do is to embrace who we are and to embrace our experiences. And so I find that popping up when I write. I want to be the best writer. I
Yeah,
find
yeah.
it popping up when I go to a meditation retreat and I want to be the best meditator. And I think what's changed for me is that it used to be the driving force in my life. Now it's a interesting observation about what's going on. Now I can see it, and I there's a bit of a, have a bit of a relationship with that side of myself now. I think it's cute and I understand it. And like you, I can know the story of that part of myself and it touches me. It hurts my heart. I can have compassion for that side versus, what before was just suppressing. And then maybe after suppressing came, God, I hope if I meditate enough, I can make that part of myself go away.
Mm, mm. Can you take us, for the benefit of people who don't know your story, can you take us through how you grew up and what you did after that?
Yeah, so I was raised for the most of my life by my single mom, my sister and I, and we lived in a trailer in the Arizona desert. My mom was a like a custodian or a guardian at a children's home, and so she was taking care of other children a lot, and there was a expectation because of how much work that she had, how alone she was, that that we would kind of be good and kind of independent and not be causing extra trouble. So we were very loved. My mom was a deeply loving person, but there was always kind of this extra piece of, but we needed to be really good because she was dealing with the kids who really needed her help. And and so there was this, in addition to not kind of having my dad there was always this sense that my mom, only a part of her belonged kind of to us, that she was kind of split in pieces caring for all these other children. And so throughout my life, whether it was at the children's home or later in life, she worked at daycare centers when we moved to California. There was kind of always this thing where my mom was working really hard, 2, 3 jobs. She was caring for other people's children. She was a wonderful caregiver. So the children and the parents really loved her. And I always kind of missed my mom. I always just kind of remember sitting off to the side going, I just really wish my mommy was mine. And in addition to this, we were really poor. Like we my mom didn't want to receive public assistance, but we were on that borderline and just living paycheck to paycheck, and at times, if the rent went up, not knowing where we were gonna live. And so I think those two kind of themes of feeling alone and feeling very vulnerable because we didn't have money, they were really big drivers for me. And so as soon as I could figure out how to make money, I was selling gum on the schoolyard in elementary school. And, like I would tell my mom, hey, drop me off at the corner. And she probably thought it was because I was embarrassed of her car, but it was really because I would take a quarter to 7-Eleven and I would buy a pack of gum. And then I would sell the gum for a quarter a piece to the kids who were richer than I. And I would get $1, and with $1 I would buy my lunch, and that way I didn't have to stand in the free lunch line. And that was a source of pride for me. And so that was kind of, how I got started. And then I started working at a flea market as a parking attendant. And I started watching other people sell things at this flea market or a swap meet. And I started selling things at the flea market, and eventually I became the manager. And it was just a series of kind of entrepreneurial moves until I eventually was promoted at the flea market to being in charge of their food and beverage operation. And they had a core problem, which was that people shopped and they didn't stop and actually eat and drink. And so I figured out that if I put live bands playing music out on the patio, I could get people to stop and have a beer. And that's how I became a concert promoter. And so from there, when my life at the flea market wrapped up, I went into the concert business, starting very small, and over a series of years and with a lot of blessings and good luck, I slowly moved up until I was hired by a company called Clear Channel, which eventually became Live Nation. And 6 years ago, I was the number 2 person at Live Nation under Michael Rapino, and that is my story.
You say it's with blessings and good luck, but I presume you must have been extremely driven to get that far as well. Is that fair?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a toll, I think there's this sense of like you never arrive because the hole inside you is so big. It's
Mm,
like the hole of the little boy who wanted his daddy and mommy. That's an unfillable hole, and it can't get filled by concerts and paychecks and houses and cars. And so at every stage of my life, I thought I kind of would have this moment where I think I've arrived, except for I still felt like I was empty inside, and so I would do the next thing, and it was much of it's a blur because it was such a subconscious drive, it was such an internal yearning for acceptance that I have trouble sometimes like remembering the specific details because the thing that I do remember is I have to keep going. If I stop, this is all going to come crumbling down, and I'm going to be that little boy again that nobody loves, and I can't let that happen. And so I just drove and drove and drove and drove, and I one of the points that I made in that article that you read, I think that's what we're all doing at some level. I think until we stop, until we look at the hole in our heart, until we invest some of that external passion and we turn it inwards and look at our own selves and sit with our own selves and show up for those quiet times with our own self. I think most of us in one way or another are doing that. We're driven by this subconscious desire to feel good and loved, which is human,
mm,
and we just don't talk about it in our society, and so then we call it being an a-hole, or we call it whatever, driven or superstar or MVP or gold sticker on the chalkboard. And
yeah.
inside, I think most of us in our honest moments would trade that for a hug and an I love you, and I think
Yeah.
so much of mindfulness is learning to give ourselves that hug and and say I love you to ourselves.
Absolutely, to express loving kindness to ourselves. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. You at one point, and maybe you still are, I don't know, but at one point you were mixing with kind of pretty famous and successful people. Did you sort of, well, would you say that that is a trait of successful people, or do you think this is like specific to you, this kind of desire to be loved, or the just desire to make up for, for a perceived lack of love?
I think in general, what I've learned in my life is that the bigger the story of our life, the more unloved we felt, and hence we created the bigger story.
Right.
And I don't think it's limited though to like powerful and famous people. I think we all have the parts of our life where we've created a big story, and sometimes that just is I'm the best contractor in the Western United States. Whatever the story is, I think it's usually when we take the time to kind of gently pick away at that scab, we start to find some pain in there, and that's why we created the story in the first place. That's why it needed to be big. So yeah, I generally assume that when I see someone with exploding pyrotechnics and 42 sound trucks on the road, that there's a story there,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not bad. That's called being a human being.
yeah.
And I think that's one of the key points, right? Is like this not a judgment, it's just a fact of our own humanity. And then the question is, will we stop and face that humanity without looking away and give it love? And
Right.
and that for me really is the whole essence of this kind of thing that we call a spiritual journey, is are we willing to grab our own hand, and just tenderly walk with ourselves, and then the story's cool, and then it's okay what job you have, and it's okay however you're going to show up in the world, because you're dealing with that innate inner kind of relationship with yourself, and that understanding of what you truly need as a human being to feel okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So, um, I suppose this leads us on to that moment of, is it fair to call it transformation, do you think, when your mum got ill?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, a Zen teacher, and I've heard him use enlightenment experience, that term, a lot.
Mm,
And
mm.
I kind of don't like those terms because I find more often than not that's a story, that's connected to like a thing too that somehow pushes others away. But I do think that moment when my mom got ill, my world stopped. And I don't know if she hadn't got ill, if it would have stopped. And I definitely at that point, began to make a giant left turn in life
Well,
that,
sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Where were you turning from? What was your life like at that point?
I was I was working, as many hours as I could in the day and sleeping as little as I could. Um, I was at that point, I had been through my second divorce, so I was a single father of two, which, when you talk about power of story, is very interesting because my mom was a single parent of two.
Right.
And incidentally, my sister is a single parent of two. Um, and so I was a single dad. I had custody of my two kids. I was working, 18-hour days, as many hours as I could put into the day. I was running myself ragged. I was in a business, where also when I was having fun, I was having as much fun as I could have. And so there was, zero care for myself, too much food, too much alcohol, too much work, too much stress.
Yeah.
And I think I had gotten really lost in externally trying to, fill that internal hole. And then I got the phone call that my mom had stage 4 cancer and they'd given her 6 months to live.
Right. Right.
And it just shattered me. I just, I realized how much of my life was about trying to make my mom proud. And here she was going to die, and she chose to not go through, an arduous chemotherapy and radiation process. And she just said, I want to live out my however much time I have with my family. And so I took time off work for the first time, and I was with my mom. And I started to see my life a little bit more clearly. I started to, in tending to my mom's heart, I started to tend to my heart. And I think in like the most important kind of mindfulness, like when someone you love is dying, you have to be there because there's nowhere else to go. There is no tomorrow. There's no future story. There's no spinning it into something else. It's like, here is my mom. She has precious time, and I'm here.
Yeah.
And there's nowhere to hide from all the stuff. And so, there we were, and we held each other, and we cried, and we were together. And after that, there was no going back.
No going back to your old life.
Yeah, it seemed, it seemed so, it's now that life seems so empty to me, and not, I don't mean that having a big job is empty. I mean that having a big job in lieu of having love for yourself is empty. I think that it's a real important distinction because we live in a world where people work, and so the message isn't, hey, working is bad. The what I've learned through my own journey and through the countless people that I talk to is that at some point this tremendous passion that we have as human beings for stuff, we have passion for jobs, we have passion sometimes for each other, we have passion for our countries, we have passion for football teams, we have passion for keeping up with the Kardashians, whatever it is. at some point we've got to take that passion and turn it inward. And when we do that, when we show up for ourselves, that's called self-love. And that's that secret sauce of life that we start to then feel this fulfillment that we've been seeking. And without it, it's just an empty charade. It's just, it's such a hard thing for people to say, this idea of loving themselves, loving ourselves. But we all want it and we all need it, and it's a core component of being a human being, and yet we invest so little time in ourselves and so much time externally. And that time that I took investing in my mom just showed me, hey, number one, the world didn't come crashing down because I stopped working. I actually feel better than I've ever felt.
Yeah, yeah.
And here I should feel horrible. My mom's died, so of course it was gut-wrenching. But inside there was this spark that happened. Inside there was this thing that said, oh, this is what living is. Even in the pain, right? It's like this too is my life. And for the first time, I started to see what I had been doing. And then I went on a journey, and with the help of great teachers have been able to, to maybe semi-articulately express it here. But at the time, I just knew there's a spark of light here that I'm not going to let go of. I'm too smart to not follow what feels right to me right now.
I saw an interview, I think it was feasibly the Washington Post one on your site, where somebody asked you a question which I thought would be quite an interesting one to repeat here. So you're at this point and you're thinking, okay, I want to go and sort of find some teachers, find myself, and with the help of teachers, I suppose. And I think there was a question somewhere anyway, said, that's something you were in a position to do, in terms of, I presume you had the money to take the time and so on and so forth. So what would you say to people who are in a what they would perceive as a more desperate situation regarding time and money? How would they kind of apply these principles?
I think it's such a brilliant conversation because, of course, it's true, right? Of course, I had more money than most people do at those points in their lives, right? I had the means to not worry. That was one less thing I had to worry about. The part that I always ask the question, though, is how much money does it take for you to care for yourself? So at what point, if money is the deciding factor, what's the amount on your internal chalkboard that you need to make before you're worthy of your own love? And that's a hard question, right? And it confronts, because there is a part of this, of course, that is financial, right? Like we have to pay our bills. But that other part that we were talking about earlier, that whole inside, that whole is independent of money. It's being driven by the pain. It's being driven by the lack of love. And so not everybody can leave their job and go to the mountains of China and study with the Shaolin monks. That's for sure. That's a blessing, and that's something that I'm very grateful for every day of my life.
That's what you did, is it?
Yeah, but
okay.
but all of us can care for ourselves once we start to learn how, right? All of us, as we've learned through meditation, can stop and breathe. All of us can pick a little bit healthier option to eat. All of us can stop and hold our heart and take a deep breath and say, I love you. So it's like, I think there is a money conversation, but the money conversation often is used as the mask to not address the underlying thing that's going on in our world right now, which is we don't care for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't care about ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose that question was also a little bit badly timed in the timeline of this interview, in the sense that what I was also going to go on and say was when you had this awakening, how you actually kind of moved it forward, what you did, who did you get in touch with, and how did you develop?
Actually, I think the timing is great because the first thing I did was I went and lied on the beach, which was which was something I was solely able to do because of the money. So I actually think I think the timing was good because I had no idea what to do. I didn't know who I was.
Right.
You
Okay.
know, my whole life I had been Jason, some kind of business guy, and at that point I was, Jason, as you said, with, a pretty impressive list of friends and clients, and all of a sudden I was, in my mind, I was nobody, less than nobody, because I didn't have anything to point to as to what I was doing.
Mm.
And so I just rented a house at the beach and I lied on the beach. And um, I luckily was in therapy. From the time that my mom was sick, I was in therapy, and so I was learning to breathe, which was which is amazing, like how important breathing is, right? And how little time we put to it,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
I was actually learning to take for the first time a really deep mindful breath. And then one day a friend of mine called and he said, I've met this um, guru in Los Angeles, and he was really great, but I had this sense while I was with him that I actually met him for you. And the person that called me and said that was actually Michael Rapino, who'd been my boss at Live Nation,
Right.
and which was amazing in itself. So here's my former boss still kind of leading me on this journey, which was beautiful. And so I called Guru Singh, and I went and met with him. And the moment I walked in and saw him, I just, it was one of those moments where I knew I was supposed to be there. And he taught me to meditate. He taught me to do yoga, and that was really the beginning of my journey. And shortly thereafter, through a couple other people that I had met, I ended up in China at the Shaolin Temple with the Zen Buddhist monks there, which was another amazing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
One of those things that I remember waking up in the morning at the temple, crying every morning, crying, thinking, how did I get here? Like it's just like I could kind of like trace this like tenuous thread through how I got from trailer park to CEO of global music at Live Nation. But I just I couldn't find that thread anymore. I just couldn't. It was really this sense of like, wow, I really must be loved because somehow I got here.
Mm.
Somehow all that led me here. And that was really important. That was a beautiful moment.
Tell me about that. That's absolutely fascinating. The idea of this Shaolin Temple. What goes on in a place like that?
Well, it's an interesting place because it's in China, and so it's a Buddhist temple. It's actually the birthplace of Zen Buddhism. It's the place that Bodhidharma put together, the tenets of what is kind of Chinese um, Zen.
Right.
And it's also the birthplace of herbal medicine, which is important to me. And then it's also the birthplace of Kung Fu. And so what you have at the Shaolin Temple is these wonderful, tender, giggly, just beautiful monks who are also vicious kung fu killers. Like it's the ultimate warrior monk. And for me, that was like really important because as I started to awaken my spirituality, I started to kind of feel like I felt like I'd lived my whole life squashing down the sensitive side of myself.
Yeah.
And then in business. And then as I became spiritual, I felt myself squashing down the warrior. And it started to feel like I think I'm doing the same thing. Like, I feel good and I feel like I'm a nicer person and all that stuff, but it doesn't feel whole to me. And so when I got to the Shaolin Temple and I met these warrior monks and I watched them fight, and then I meditated with them. I didn't fight with them,
Luckily.
but you know, I watched and then I meditated with them. It just started to click for me. Is like, this is it. Like, we're not finding peace. We're learning to be at peace with who we are and where we are. And these young men have somehow found that balance. Do you know, through physical training and through diet and through meditation and through what they've studied, they've found this balance where they're okay with, I'm a warrior and I'm a monk, you know? And I think very much in our world right now, that's what bodhisattva is, because we need the nitty gritty worldly part of ourselves to get us through what is a really like a, I don't know even what the right word is, like living in America right now. I think you've been through it with Brexit. But,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
we're days out from an election
Yeah.
that like is tearing our country apart.
Yeah,
Like,
a lot of similarities. Yeah, we're
yeah, it's
getting it
just
on the
like,
telly all the time over here, and it's very similar, very divisive. Yeah,
yeah, and it's just like, wow. And so, you know, you need some like grittiness to yourself to kind of just make it through what's going on. And yet we've got to open our hearts. You know, it's like we just got to keep our hearts open, and we've got to love ourselves, and we've got to love each other. And so it's like, for me, that warrior monk that I found at the Shaolin Temple and that I have discovered inside myself, I now really think that is what bodhisattva is in 2017. And we're in 2016, and it's 2018 probably too. So
probably.
but you know, that's what bodhisattva is. And I think like that, so that for me, being there with the monks, it was really for me, that experience can be summed up of like, you're okay, you know, like that whole first part of your life was not a mistake. It wasn't a waste. It wasn't bad. And you, inside you, have this warrior who made it to where you made it, and you have this gentle soul who wants to be expressed right now.
Yeah.
And when you can put those two together, Jason, and you can live with an open heart but with power, then that's it. And that's really kind of what I endeavored to do, leaving the Shaolin Temple.
Perhaps that's perhaps that's quite an important point actually, because most people I talk to talk of some kind of transition at some point, and maybe it's quite important to remember that we need to sort of express loving kindness not just to ourselves but to the selves we used to be as well, and you know, yeah, to live with our history as well as our present perhaps.
Yeah, I think without it, I think sometimes I see in spirituality this tendency to say there's no good and bad, but really reward a certain good, you know?
Yeah.
And I had a spiritual publication one time tell me that they didn't like my story because they like riches to rag stories.
Right.
In other words, because I didn't end up desolate on the street, my story wasn't kind of valid. And I think no. I think all of us at the core desire to be accepted. And so if our spiritual journey is to awaken love in the world, and therefore is to accept the world, how can it bypass accepting ourselves? And then that means there's a whole bunch of skeletons in the closet that we got to start making friends with. You know, it means that Jason on a meditation cushion at a retreat in Bath, England, is just as lovable as Jason on the floor in Las Vegas throwing up after a night of partying. You know what I mean? It's like, it's got to be that all of me is accepted and all of me is loved. And through that love, then I think all these kind of things that we talk about of letting go and transforming and opening, it's through that acceptance that that happens. It's through the hug of ourselves that we find the confidence to crack open the heart ever more each day. And when the judgment comes, no matter what that judgment is, when the judgment comes, we close the heart. And I think it's most harshest when we judge ourselves. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, of course,
this
yeah.
journey for me is not about getting over anything. This journey for me is about accepting every little inch of Jason, of this being that I can learn and love it, even when it's hard, even when I have to accept that it's hard for me today to love that part of myself, then I'm going to accept that part.
Yeah,
I'm going to accept that it's
absolutely.
hard,
Yeah, yeah, acceptance, and then acceptance of feeling difficult with acceptance. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, what did you do then when you sort of how long were you at the Shaolin Temple? Actually, that's quite
I was
interesting.
only there a couple weeks.
Right. Was
Um,
it a long couple of weeks? Was it?
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a culture shock, so
Yeah.
it was, yeah, it was a long couple of weeks. But then I came home and now I was just energized, and I started looking for more teachers. And I had learned this in business, that more mentors is good and more perspective is good. And I also knew I didn't want to sign up for a club. So I didn't want to be, I wasn't going to, I didn't want, I'd already been Jason the businessman. Now I didn't need to be Jason some other ist.
Right. Okay.
And
Yeah.
so, and so I kind of set out with the concept of, I have a toolbox and it's empty right now. I mean, it's full of like warrior tools, but it's empty as far as like compassion tools, and I want to fill it. And so I started going to retreats, and I started looking for teachers, and I started calling teachers, and I would write letters to people that I admired, and I met this wonderful group of teachers that I just love so dearly, and I kept going with the journey. And so, by example, I met Sharon Salzberg, who
Ah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
who is a just I she refers to Kempo as her heart teacher, and I refer to her as my heart teacher, because she really. I remember the first time I sat down to meditate with Sharon, and she said, I was at a retreat with Ram Dass, and Sharon says, okay, so during meditation our mind will wander, and when it wanders, at some point you'll catch yourself, and when you catch yourself, that's the most important moment. And I thought, yeah, okay, I've heard that before. And she said, but not because you've caught yourself, because in this moment that you've caught yourself, you now have an opportunity to develop a new relationship with yourself. And you have a choice to judge yourself or to bring yourself back with kindness.
Yeah.
And Sharon taught me in those moments when we spin out, you just, welcome back, Jason, I love you. And it like, when I heard her teach that, I just thought wow, that's it, because so often we make meditation this almost competitive sport that we're in, like, can I clear my mind? And how empty was my mind today? And here Sharon saying, no, it's just all about getting lost and starting over with kindness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I fell in love. I mean, it's just that was it. And my wife was with me, and my kids were with me too. And we all went up and we talked to Sharon, and we became friends, and we've been on retreats and together, and we've traveled to sit with other teachers together. And she's a national, global treasure that everybody who hasn't listened or read her teachings should. And from there, I met Soni Rinpoche, just another amazing teacher who teaches, the path to emptiness through getting to know ourselves and through being kind to the pain that we have. What he calls the horrible monsters, like just kind of confronting not pushing away, not suppressing these things that come up in meditation, but when a strong theme that haunts us shows up, just sitting with it and without agenda.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just, hey, like,
yeah.
yes, when little Jason, who felt unloved by his dad, pops up in my meditation, instead of going, go away, I'm busy right now, it's just, yeah, we can sit here together.
And
And
how
we
does
can sit here. We can sit here as long as you need to sit here with me because you're welcome here.
and how does that feel?
It feels like home. It feels. There's this great poem by the great poet David White called House of Belonging. And it talks about that. It just talks about, this is where I belong. And when we can sit with the most undesirable parts of ourselves, when I'm in meditation and something like that's painful, right? Like, my dad didn't love me enough to stick around. That, like, not even like sugarcoating it and painting it up and making it sound pretty, but like the feeling that I experienced as a little boy, my daddy doesn't love me. And when that pops up in meditation and it's welcome, then you're home. That's home. And I think that's where meditation can just be so powerful for us. It is this place where we're home, where we're whole, where we're okay. And the beautiful part is that it's actually available to us all, and it's us. It's innate. It's in us, and I think that's, for me, has really been the gift of meditation.
Yeah. Blimey, yeah. Okay. I'm a bit. Yeah, I'm very moved by what you just said, actually, about little Jason. You know.
Yeah.
That's because we've all got a little Jason. Well, not a little Jason, but we've all got a little version of ourselves where stuff has happened, haven't we? And that's what informs who we are now. And that's a really powerful thing to say. I think, certainly. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because we all have the little, insert the name. What's really interesting is that when we look into it, they're almost all the same. Do you know? It's like,
Yeah.
I wrote a
Yeah.
I wrote a piece once called "Out of the Closet," and I was making this point that, like, we've all kind of scrunched all this stuff into our closet. It's like the funny story that Bob Thurman tells about the Dalai Lama coming over to his house, and the Dalai Lama announces he's coming over, and it's like he's like 10 minutes away. It's like, we're on the way. So Bob says that he takes everything in his house and like shoves it in the closet. And because like the Dalai Lama's coming over, like, I want it to look good.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the Dalai Lama gets there, and of course the Dalai Lama has a great sense of humor and also knows humans. And the first thing he does is he walks over and opens the closet.
Yeah.
And the Baba said, well, what are you doing? And he said, the house looked too clean. I knew everything must have been in the closet, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, so this is what we do, is we take all this stuff and we hide it in the closet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but we're convinced it's like unique stuff. Like, you think like the Gerard stuff is really like,
Yeah. I'm the only
different.
person who's ever experienced that kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
But
sure.
and yet the underlying feeling when we go below, like, maybe it wasn't your dad, but it was your mom, or maybe it wasn't your mom, but it was your aunt, or maybe it wasn't,
Yeah.
it
always,
was your
yeah.
horse died when you were two,
Yeah.
whatever the thing is, when we go just below, we find, oh wow, we're all the same.
Yeah.
Little Gerard and little Jason, they just wanted to be loved.
Yeah. And when all
And
that
then
pain comes out of the closet, all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure off, isn't there?
Yeah, and then so you just go, and that's kind of like one of the things that I really work on, and why I try to write and talk as openly as I can. Even like, some of your questions have brought little tears to my eyes, but that's okay, right? Because here we are, right? Like, what more do we want than to have that kind of a connection? And the only way we invite that connection is by opening the closet. As
Absolutely.
long as we
Yeah.
close the closet, we're caught up in this BS
Yeah.
that has driven our world to where it is,
Yeah.
with a
Well, that's
bunch of
right. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
bunch of people wrapped up in their BS on TV talking about BS, right?
Yeah.
While the rest of us are just like, wow, we're all in pain. But we can't get caught up in the same thing. We got to open our closets, all of us, and we got to be willing to connect at this level of the little us that has some pain, and be willing to, like, hey, let's compare notes,
Yeah.
and let's play a bit. And I think that's like a really important thing, is we've got different scenarios, but underneath, I just have learned we're all looking for the same thing, and we possess it. We can share it with each other if we're just willing to kind of open up a little bit.
And in that respect, it's not a surprise that you're involved in music, really, because a lot of music is involved in that, isn't it? A lot of music is, a lot of songs are saying, "This is how I feel. Do you feel that way too?" On the more credible end of stuff, as anyway.
Yeah, I a friend of mine sent me Jay-Z's new song "Spiritual,"
Hmm.
and you should read the lyrics to this song, because he's talking. It's this interview,
Right.
and he's talking about how the little him that wasn't safe got wrapped up in the big package called Jay-Z, and how he finally has the confidence now to kind of have that little boy standing next to him while he's living life. And I think that's it, right? I think
Yeah.
that's what so much of art is art is the often the pain and the suffering that lives inside us being expressed in some safe medium. And
Absolutely.
often
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
canvas or a CD is much safer than kind of carrying it on your sleeve.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely right. So, okay, you've left the Shaolin Temple now. You're back in California, presumably. Um, what next? Is this when you started writing?
Yeah, and so, my whole life people had said, like, you should write a book, but it was always kind of that ego.
It's going to be the book about the music. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then tell me all
Yeah.
about your friends, and
Yeah.
boy, what you did was so amazing. That kind of book that just wasn't part of what I wanted to do. But
Were you never tempted to write that book?
no,
No.
no, and but as I kind of started to reemerge in the world after learning with these teachers, which I continue to do,
Yeah.
but my friends would start calling me, and they had problems, and they sounded a lot like the problems that I had had, and so I think I was probably the correct one to call, and I started to notice that everybody was going through this stuff, everybody that I knew,
Oh, that's
and then
interesting. Yeah.
and then my friends would say, well, you should write a book, and all of a sudden I started thinking, like, well, that actually was a book that I actually would feel would be a service,
A
I would
contribution. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, sharing something like that wouldn't be ego. It actually would be like, hey, let me tell you my story, and how I feel, and how and what I've learned. And so um I sat down one day to start writing, and 14 days later I emerged from my bedroom, and I had the first draft of And I Breathed.
Right.
And I Breathed is a very open, vulnerable, I think at times it's heartbreaking, um, story of, not the story of my life, but the story of what was going on inside my heart as I was living that life. And I really, I really pushed myself, and my family, who was, obviously with me as I was writing it, pushed me to be open, more and more open. And I really wanted to kind of show what was going on. It's like kind of like a backstage pass to what was going on inside of me.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a book that I love to share, because it's like I'll be on a meditation retreat, and I'll meet someone, I'll share the book with them, and at the end of the retreat they'll be like, God, I just know everything about you now. I feel like I need to sit and talk to you for 5 hours so I can tell you my story. And it's like, it's that kind of opening the closet that I was talking about. And that's what I tried to do with And I Breathe.
And it's about connection, isn't it? I think I was personally, I was very resistant to connection for many years, and I'm only still really opening up to it, really, truthfully. Um, and yeah, I think that kind of whole connection thing, which you probably have a bit more of in California than I do in England, anyway. I think it's a vital part of human life, isn't it? I mean, almost provably scientifically, really.
Yeah, and I think I was watching the World Series here
That's
whenever it
baseball,
was.
yeah.
Yeah, the baseball championship, and it went into like extra time, and it was one of those like nail biting games, and they kept panning the people in the crowd, and it was like all these people were there together. They were like hugging each other, and they were holding hands. They were crying together, and it's like we so desperately want to connect with one another
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we're willing to find our connection through guys running around in tight pants hitting balls with sticks. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
We really gotta
Yeah.
get real about that's how bad we want to connect. That's where we'll go to connect. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Same with England with soccer, as you call it over there. Yeah, yeah. It's about living in the moment, isn't it? For that moment, all you care about is connecting. You don't worry about your future. You don't worry about your past. For that moment, you're just another person who wants to connect with other people. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
That's right. I
yeah,
think that, and so I think then the cool part is when we recognize I already possess the skill to connect. How do I know? I did it at the baseball game. I did it at the soccer game. I did it at church. I did it whatever.
yeah,
Now then we're just saying, okay, perhaps we can find a little bit deeper connection, but we already have the skill. So now it's just adding to a skill that we already possess, maybe refocusing it. Maybe I want to connect internal.
yeah,
Maybe I want to connect with my family members around something deep in my life. But the skill itself we already possess. So it's not something brand new we've got to learn. It's just a refocusing of something that we already possess, you know?
well, like breathing. Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we all know how to do it. Thank goodness. Yeah, yeah. So, tell me about your life now. What? Tell me about your life, how you live it, and your day. Firstly, maybe.
Well, I think my day right now, I think the word that I like to assign to my life is practice. And what I've come to learn is that this whole kind of who is Jason is a very kind of nebulous thing. But what I notice is that what I practice tends to kind of be expressed throughout my day and throughout my life. And so I've tried to build a life where I'm practicing throughout the day the things that are important to me. And so I have a diet that is really all about kind of nutrient dense and compassionate towards the planet foods. And I set up my day so that that sometimes that's hard stuff to get in our world. So I set up my day so that I can find it. We make juices in the morning and we chill them, and then we can carry them if we go somewhere. And we wake up in the morning and we do yoga together as a family,
Including the children, yeah?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's not, but not. So I have at home I have a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old. My 13-year-old is not into yoga or meditation,
Mm.
but she's into dance, and so kind of through conversation and through working together, dance has become her where she goes and stretches. So
Right.
she gets that stretching through yoga, and it's also where she's very mindful and aware of her body. And
Sure.
so
Yeah, of
that
course.
has become her. Now, our 18-year-old, he goes on meditation retreats with us and is
Really?
very much on this. He did
Blimey, that's mad. Yeah,
7. We were on 7 meditation retreats this summer,
yeah.
and he was with us on 6 of them.
Compared
And
compared to your experience with your parents, that must make you extremely comfortable.
it's one of those things that it swells your heart up inside. And
Yeah, I bet it
I
does. Yeah, I
I
bet it
look
does.
over sometimes, and and as you know, like often the retreats are silent, and so you're actually sitting with your child as an equal
Mm,
and not framing their experience of life, not telling them what the teacher said. In other words, Kevin and I are sitting at a retreat listening to Soni Rinpoche talk, and I have to trust that he is a whole and complete being who can hear the teaching and sit with it without dad doing it, and so it's a very moving experience. It's also, when you talk about learning to let go as a parent, it's also very much hands-on letting go training. And he's just an amazing young man, and more than my son, he's a companion on this journey. And I think when I look back to my childhood, not only are Kevin and I together in a way that my mom and I, or certainly my dad and I, were never together, but I really learned to trust him,
mm,
and I
mm.
really learned to give him a space to grow, and to, that this is not only my life, this also is his life too. And he gets to life gets to show up for him as it needs to for him, and that's not for me to meddle in. We're just walking together, as Ram Dass says, like we're just walking each other home, and maybe in this case we're just walking together at home, and that's a very beautiful thing for me.
I bet it is. Yeah, yeah. Because I don't know if it's a generational thing. I'm feasibly a bit older than you, but I'm near enough to call myself the same generation, perhaps. And my parents were so old-fashioned, and they were kind of just in a different world. They would never have inhabited this world, and I do wonder if there is a generational thing going on. I suppose in California, there's always been that kind of presence of that kind of thing since the '60s. When you were in the music business, were you drawn towards any hippie stuff, or was it kind of like commercial stuff?
I was, it's funny. I was drawn towards filling that hole inside. It's like
Yeah,
a lot of people assume like I'm a huge music fan, and I am. I like music, but that wasn't my draw
I get you.
to
Yeah,
that job. That job had a purpose in my life, and
yeah.
it was to fill that hole.
Sure, sure, sure.
But I do think there is a generational aspect to our kids. I also think there's this. I think we always have to keep checking in, right? I mean, I think what's one thing meditation teaches us, right, is that you kind of keep checking in and starting over.
Yeah,
And I think as parents in today's world, we have to check in that like a lot of the things that we have considered to be core competencies of parenting just aren't working. And they're not working because we look at our world and we see the state of our world. And so I think we have to, like, there's this sense that I have of not being afraid to try a different way. And so,
of
you know,
parenting, you mean?
and so like maybe 5 hours of homework isn't the best way to teach our kids to be caring young people.
No,
Like just
sure.
as an example, like
Yeah,
maybe teaching them that after school they come home and work nonstop while we yell at them, and then get them up at 8 and drag them out of the house and drop them off at some school where they're surrounded by other young people who aren't being guided very well. Like maybe we've got to have the courage to say, this is my child, and our life, and we're going to try this a different way. And so I think there is a generational aspect to it, in that evolution kind of often brings us to places of crisis. And I feel like when we look around, there is this moment where things aren't working very well, and we can't be afraid to be entrepreneurs in our own life, in our own spirituality, in our parenting, in our relationships. And that means, like, sometimes you got to look for new ways to do things. And I think that's a real opportunity in this moment that we're all kind of living together, is, hey, we know it doesn't work, so let's try a different way, you know? And I think that's what we've tried to do. And my son has been a real entrepreneur in how he's approached life, and he's just not afraid to kind of find the pieces that work for him. Like my daughter, who said, hey, I'm not into this meditation thing, but I like to dance. Can that be mindful too? And in there, we all kind of connect and meet, and none of it's traditional, and yet it's all working pretty good, you know?
When I was young, I was a punk rocker. Absolute rebellion against my parents, yeah. And it's quite. What fascinates me in our conversation here is that there is nothing to rebel against with you, is there? Or if I was your child and I was 13 or something, I'd just go with it. I wouldn't have anything I wouldn't have any need to rebel.
You know, a funny thing about about parenting, it's such a great thing, is that what I've observed is that there are certain stages of our life where we rebel no matter what.
Right.
And what I decided is I was not going to buy into any system that caused me to be on the side that my son needed to rebel against me. Yeah. And so he rebels, and he pushes back, including with these great spiritual teachers. He pushes them when he thinks that there's hierarchy, or when he thinks that there's injustice, or when he thinks that there's inconsistency in the teaching. And I have chosen to take his side. Do you know what I mean? I don't mean that I say that he's right, but I've chosen to support the fact that he has that right to kind of learn for himself. So I've found that my kids rebel, and I just have put myself in a place where I'm not the one being rebelled against. And that's created unity, though. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do. Yeah,
that's created this bond of like, hey, we're all out here walking in life together.
Yeah.
Which, in a larger sense, I think that's what we're all trying to like express through all of this stuff in the world. Is like, we're all in pain. We all need each other, and so we got to start finding ways that are going to be unorthodox to show up for one another. Or else we're just going to keep being like this world that seems like every time you turn around, every election is like 50.1 to 49.9. And like, we can't survive as a species like this. And yet underneath all that, there are always places that we can intersect, and we got to find them, I think. And so that's what we're trying to do. And some days it works better than others, but that's what we're endeavoring to do.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. We can't survive as a species like this. I mean, we haven't really got very long in terms of global warming, in terms of all sorts of kind of ways that the Earth could just end. Not the Earth could end, but the human presence on it could end. And Gerard,
and I think is because we tend to kind of go to those big issues, but I think we haven't got much time with our own hearts. Do you know? I bet the Earth has longer than a lot of human beings on this planet who don't feel loved right now. You know, and so yes, we do need to solve global warming. I've ventured to say we're not going to solve global warming until we solve our own unloved hearts.
Absolutely,
That's the one we can take a step today, right now. We can take a deep breath. We can put our hands on our hearts. We can begin to show some compassion for ourselves and then the compassion flows for the planet. And it's not mutually exclusive, but I think so often we look at the state of our world, and we go out to the big issue, the big unsolvable issue, the one that's going to take years to solve, and inside is the immediate issue of I need to be cared for. I deserve to be cared for. My heart deserves to be cared for. The person next to me deserves to be cared for. The homeless person on the street needs a hug. And it's like there's these things that appear in our lives every day that we can take action on, but we get overwhelmed by the bigness of how messed up everything is.
Yeah.
And then there's the simple issue of like little Jason clutching his Winnie the Pooh wants a hug from his dad and his mom. And then I can't solve that one anymore because they're gone, but I can give myself that hug, and I can tell my wife I could use a hug, and I can be there for her to give her a hug. And I think those immediate little moments that we can express love through mindful awareness, that's where the real opportunity lies right now to do something to make the world a better place. And maybe it sounds a little glib or naive, but I really think like we're all deserving of being loved, and it's something as humans that we need. And it's time that we take that kind of external attention and we focus a little bit of it on ourselves.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think that through it, we start to just find that the whole that big hole in our heart just it starts to close up a little bit. We start to feel a little more whole.
Thank you. Yeah, if that's glib or naive, you can count me in because I think, yeah, absolutely right. That sounds like a perfect place, a perfect kind of closing speech, you might say, really. Um, that's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Jason.
No, thank you. This was a real pleasure. This was fun.